Hello friends, I am Chevee. Welcome to my shed. How are you today? How's life in your world? How's things where you are? I hope everything is good and great and wonderful. Today we are going to talk about Detective: A Modern Crime board game Season 1. Before I talk about this game and before I give you my thoughts about this game, I want you to know a couple of things. One, this game is by Portal Games. If you don't know me, I have worked with Portal Games since 2014. I no longer work for Portal Games in any sort of official capacity, but I am still very heavily connected to Portal Games. I'm still considered a team member. Okay? Two, this game is based on Detective: A Modern Crime board game, which was released in 2017? 2018? I think 2017 feels right. I don't know. It was released a few years ago. And this is kind of the smaller brother of Detective: A Modern Crime board game. But to tell you, I'm about to tell you a whole bunch of comparisons between this game and that game, but I want you to know that I've never actually played the original game. I worked on it, so I had already had all the stuff spoiled to me, so I've never really sat down and played the original Detective. But I can tell you about this because I had nothing to do with it at all, and I got to experience it as a gamer. So there we go. Detective Season 1 is a fully cooperative, deeply immersive board game in which 1 to 5 players take on the roles of investigators trying to solve a crime. It consists of 3 standalone cases that can each be played in around 90 minutes each. That is the key, the 90 minutes. If you have played Detective: A Modern Crime board game, the original game, it can take 3-4 hours to solve a case. They're big. They're big cases. This is a streamlined, trimmed down, much more accessible version of that game. And we're going to go from there with this. I want you to also be aware of one other thing. I have only played the first case in this box. So everything that I'm about to tell you is based on a single play of the first case. If you're wanting to know, yes, you can only play each case once. So in this box, you've got 3 cases that you can play through once. I guess if you do really bad, you could replay it again and try to get a higher score. That's a possibility. But in reality, you're probably only going to play each case in this box once. That's not a bad thing. There's a lot of value in here, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. But keep in mind, everything I'm about to say, all the opinions that I have so far, are only based on the first case. And I'm the kind of person that if I'm not grabbed instantly by a game or a TV show or a book or whatever, if that first introduction isn't gripping, it sullies my entire view. So there you go. And given my connection to Portal, I cannot promise you that there's no bias in what I'm about to say. But I think I have some honest opinions that might not be particularly glowing. So we'll see. In the box, what are we going to find? Well, like I just told you, you've got 3 cases, and you're going to have 3 decks of cards that are 23 cards each. Those decks of cards are what make up the cases. If you have played the original Detective: A Modern Crime board game, those 3 decks are kind of... I don't want to say it's all that has been brought forward from that game, but it essentially is. These are narrative games where you're trying to solve a crime. You're playing as detective, somebody's been murdered, something's been stolen, whatever, and you're trying to figure out who done it, or why, or what, or how, whatever. And so you're going to get cards that are leads, and leads give you information, and they might give you more leads, and they might give you files or evidence that you can use. In this game, you have access to the database. You're kind of not the FBI database, but it's called the Antares database, and you can log in and read files and cases, and you can put fingerprints in and match them to people. And so these cards and that Antares database are kind of all that's been brought forward. Now I say kind of because there's still a board. There's still a board, and you move around the board. There's 5 spaces that you can visit. There's a campus, a police station, HQ, the lab, or your field work. You still have time to track. Just like the original Detective, everything that you do takes time, and you only have a limited amount of time. So you have to solve this thing quick, which is what restricts you from doing all of the things. I told you earlier this deck has 23 cards. I think in my playthrough we saw 11 of them. So less than half. because everything takes hours and you only have 22 hours to spend. So you got to kind of burn through this. But when I say that this deck in the Antares database is the only thing that's been carried forward, what I mean is this is... The thing that streamlines this game is they kind of removed most of the gamification. So Detective has a good bit of gamification. You can gamify how you go about the research. You can min-max how you spend your time doing things and your tokens. This really just has a deck of cards and a simple time track to try and figure this case out. You do have tokens. There are some, I think they're just called investigation tokens. We started our game with 2 and we ended with 1. So they're different in this version. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that after I show you what else is in here. We have some character cards. This is a cool little thing where you can get a character card that gives you kind of a role within your detective agency. So you might be the person who's in charge of taking notes, or you might be the person who's in charge of tracking your leads, or you might be the person who's in charge of looking things up in the database. And so this gives you kind of a little bit of a role in case, you know, you don't want to necessarily play the whatever. You can just take the character that you like and say, well, this is my role. You could also just not ever use these and everybody could do all the things. That's a possibility. You also are going to get a deck of portrait cards. And these portrait cards are, you know, pictures of people. And honestly, I didn't use them. I mean, we had them on the table because the game tells you to use them, but I didn't really reference them at all. They don't help me at all. This was something that was added as a standalone little mini expansion for the original Detective game. They're just character portraits, and they're supposed to help you kind of mentally keep track of who you're talking to and why. But in this particular version of the game, it's such a trimmed down version that there's very few people you're going to talk to throughout the course of a case, and having a picture of them didn't help me at all. It really did nothing for me. This isn't used in, at least in the first case. Remember, this is only based on the first case. This isn't used in any other way. It's not like you flip over a card and find out, oh, that was this guy we already talked to. It's a different name or something like that. It's just a picture of a person that, I don't know. In some cases, I don't even feel like the person on this picture matches the description that's in the cards. But whatever. Maybe it does help some people who have that sort of mental mapping ability to put places and faces together. I'm not that person. So, not for me. The real meat is what's in this deck of cards, and I can tell you that if you're interested in the original game, but it's a little too overwhelming, this does a very good job of trimming all of that stuff, that extra out. One huge change is that you don't have access to the internet in this game. At least the rulebook doesn't give you explicit access like it does in Detective. If you didn't know, in Detective, the game is taking place in the real world, and you can look up anything that you need to look up on the internet. You can do research while you're playing the game. This game doesn't give you that explicitly, and some of the cards that I found in this deck kind of hint at the fact that they don't want you to be looking things up, because there's some cards in here that want you to spend your time or resources to ask somebody a simple question. This game is also a little bit more, I would say, friendly, because there's a lot less of the kind of ham-fisted detective work in this. You're not ever going to find, well, again, in the first case, there wasn't a whole lot of finding somebody who you think is being untruthful and using your tokens to kind of force them to talk. There was none of that. So it's a little less confrontational, it feels like, and I feel like the subject matter is maybe a little bit lighter. Yes, you're dealing with murder, you're dealing with promiscuity, everybody's still smoking for some reason. That's weird. But it's really not as gritty as the base detective game. It's a little bit more light. It's a little bit more, I don't want to say whimsical, that's not the right word, but it's a little bit more inviting. Let's put it that way. It took us quite a while. I was playing 4-player. 2 of those players were my daughters. So there was, some distraction. We were eating pizza. So it took us a few hours, but we did successfully solve the first case with an 18 out of 18, which is a perfect score. And I felt like the answers that we came to, I don't know that we would have come to those answers had they not been on the multiple choice. And what I mean by that is, if you haven't played either of these games, there is no you solved the case. There's no indication that you have won the game. What happens is when you run out of time, every card costs time. When you run out of time, you take a test. And so once you've logged into the Antares database, there's a test. You answer some questions, you see what happens. One of the questions that we answered correctly, we did not naturally come to that conclusion on our own until we read the questions. And then we were like, oh, it's that one, right? Like, I feel like having not played the detective game, the base game, but reading the scenarios, I always felt like by the end of that game, you knew all the answers. It was really strange to get to a question on this questionnaire that we were in the ballpark of the answer, but until we read the options available to us, we hadn't really committed to saying, oh, it was this. Once we read the options and thought about it, it was like, oh yeah, it's that for sure. But we didn't come to that naturally on our own. So that's a little strange, but I don't know. I haven't actually gone to read the rest of the cards to find out if we missed a clue or something. I will say that from what I saw, if you are a fan of detective and you are looking for more detective, I don't know that this is your thing. I think this is intended for a different target audience. It's a familiar feeling experience, but it is a much, much, much lighter experience. That gamification is not present. You're basically just deciding to go somewhere, flipping a card, seeing how long it takes you to do that, and doing that thing. There's not a whole lot of chance to gamify this system. It's pretty much a figuring out what you think about what somebody said and determining what your next course of action is. And then following through with that and determining from that if that leads you to a new branch or if you want to investigate one of the other branches. That's the main decision. That's not to say that you can't enjoy this if you enjoy detective. If you enjoy detective and you're looking for something a little bit simpler to get to the table, I feel like this gives you a very close feeling without all of the distractions that come with everybody researching stuff on the internet and going through a pile of cards. This is much, much quicker to get through, and that's the point. That's the whole reason this exists. People ask for shorter, simpler cases and ways to get this to the table with family and friends who weren't necessarily board gamers, and that's what it does. It does it really, really well. So by the time you're watching this video, this should be released in the United States. I hope that if you find it intriguing, you'll at least give the rulebook a read. It should be available on the Portal Games website. We usually publish those, or if not, Board Game Geek, and determine if maybe this is something that your group might enjoy. That's my thoughts. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. Thank you for being here as always. Thank you for liking and commenting and subscribing and being amazing friends and wonderful people. I really appreciate you, and I will see you again tomorrow. Today's word you should know to sound smart is cognoscenti. It is a noun meaning a person with superior knowledge or understanding of a particular field. As a result of many years living in the Bordeaux region of France, I am very much a cognoscenti of wine and winemaking. Cognoscenti. COGNOSCENTE.